Hey guys, what's up? This is Brittany Crow, and for my final project, I decided to kind of hit the highlights of everything we've talked about this semester and kind of how that's important to us as educators. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. So, chapter 1 was about the basic brain facts. And basically, it talked about how different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions. For instance, the frontal lobe is a part of the brain that deals with emotions, and the temporal lobes deal with sound, music, face and object recognition, as well as long-term memory. The brain is truly a complex and amazing structure. There are a lot of parts, some big and some small, that perform all kinds of duties so you can live, think, and interact with your environment. The brain's relationship with the environment is an important one for educators to be aware of. The brain can be described as a novelty seeker. So basically, your brain is always looking for new and exciting stimuli. When an environment is one of predictable or repeated stimuli, the brain's interest is lowered. So when the environment has new and exciting stimuli, the brain's interest peaks. So basically, old stimuli is boring, and new stimuli is exciting! Sorry, that was corny, but I had to do it. Alright, so chapter 2 deals with how the brain processes information, and this is another really important thing for us to know. So the information processing model the book uses, which I've included down here, simplifies how the brain processes information and basically how we learn. Our senses pick up stimuli and either forget it or moves it to immediate memory. From there, it will either be forgotten or move to working memory. From there, it will, you guessed it, either be forgotten or if sense and meaning is attached to it, it will be moved to storage. So as we can see from the model, sense and meaning are important parts of memory storage. As teachers, knowing this, we should strive to provide sense and meaning to our lessons so that our students will remember. For example, you may not get much interest from students when teaching a lesson over the Civil War. But if you can relate the Civil War to them in a way that is important, such as maybe the effects we feel from it today, reenactments, or the closeness of battle locations, you can get students more engaged. Alright, chapter 3 dealt with memory retention and learning. And the biggest takeaway for me from this chapter was the primacy-recency effect. So this phenomenon basically states that in a learning environment, the information that is best remembered is what comes first, and then the next best remembered is what comes last. The information that is least likely to remember is what comes in the middle. So this kind of goes back to our processing model. That first bit of information has all the room. So let's say this bag is kind of considered our brain. So we just had the first bit of math that we've learned in math class today. So it's got all the room in that bag. So this is the first bit of the learning period. So the first bit of information has all the room in the semantic memory, but once the middle part occurs, there isn't any room for any more of that information, and it's lost. So then by the time the end of the lesson comes around, that first bit of information has been sorted and chunked, and so it's kind of like it's moving into the box. It's been sorted, that's its little space, and so then you have all that room again for more information, so the information towards the end. So by the time the lesson comes around, that first bit of information has been sorted and chunked, and room is created for that information. Chapter 4 dealt with the power of transfer, and the biggest things that I took away from that would be positive transfer, negative transfer, and similarity. So transfer during learning means that the past learning has an effect on present learning. Transfer of learning is the degree to which new learning is applied. So within these, you have positive and negative transfer. Positive transfer is when past learning helps new learning. So think of helping and positive. That's a positive thing when you help someone like that. Negative transfer is when past learning hurts new learning. Hurting people is a negative thing, that kind of deal. So for instance, let's say your nephew is making a transition from t-ball to live pitch. So the skills he's learned from hitting the ball off the tee will help him hit a ball that is in the air and not on a tee. It's the same mechanics kind of through that whole deal. But he also wants to take up tennis. So with tennis, the angle of the racket determines the direction and speed of the ball once at contact. So he's used to swinging really hard and really straight like you do in baseball. And so when he hits that tennis ball, just like he's been doing in baseball, that ball goes soaring over the fence, and he's going through back in the woods and things trying to find that ball. So these are important concepts to keep in mind, as well as the similarity of concepts. So two things that are taught that are very alike can be hard for students to really learn because they never quite learn the differences and see them as separate concepts. So longitude and latitude can be an example, and it's one that our book uses. So teachers must keep in mind when concepts are similar to be sure to introduce them at different times and to teach them the differences between the two and their critical attributes. That way students are able to really tell the difference and to see them as two separate concepts instead of two concepts that are very similar and can easily be confused. So Chapter 5, Brain Organization and Learning. So the big things from here were brain specializations in English versus math. So in that first chapter, we talked about how the brain is so complex and different parts have different functions. Chapter 5 hits on that same idea. So cerebral specialization is the ability of certain areas of the brain to perform unique functions. So there's also cerebral lateralization, which occurs when an activity is limited to one hemisphere of the brain. With all this in mind, it is important to understand that this does not mean each part of the brain only does that function. A lot of the parts of the brain work together to complete a task. And a big debate today is, with knowledge of how the whole brain learns, do schools do a good enough job teaching to different student preferences so that everyone can succeed? Another issue that arises is how language-oriented schools are. So this causes problems for those who do not have a strong background in language or prefer to use that. It also hurts math development because it is seen as the most important measure of intelligence. And so we can see here from this picture, this model, how different parts of the brain specialize in different functions. And even the left to the right side of the brain deal with a lot of different things. So Chapter 6, the brain and the arts. So basically, this was a really interesting chapter to me because it's something I guess I'd never really thought about just all that much. So there's many benefits to integrating the arts to play a big role in curriculum. So some of these benefits include development. The arts enhance the growth of cognitive, emotional, and psychomotor pathways. The arts allow for more student engagement, especially if they're really interested in that. And it provides an outlet for students to use. It can kind of help them relax and kind of get their mind off all the stresses of everything they're doing and just pour all of their emotion and all their baggage and anything they're bringing with them into a project. The arts, also music, allows for improved memory and it aids in mathematical functions, especially learning how to read music. It can help with that. It helps the students recognize patterns and improve counting and other things like that. And movement and dance art allows for better coordination, and it can also help ADD, ADHD students be able to kind of move around a little bit more because they need that. All right, and Chapter 7, Thinking Skills and Learning. So this one was super interesting to me too. So it dealt mostly with Bloom's taxonomy and difficulty versus complexity. So Bloom's taxonomy, that's really nothing new to educators. It is a great model that has been used as a guide to help teachers engage their students in higher level thinking. So starting at the bottom with the remember section, you want to work your way up the model all the way to create. So that way you can reach that highest level of thinking. So throughout the process of climbing the model, you'll move from just knowing definitions to being able to summarize, to being able to practice that, to being able to analyze features, and then to critique them, and then to infer from that. So within this, you'll probably hear words like difficulty and complexity when you're trying to increase thinking levels. So it's really important for teachers to understand the difference between the two. So difficulty is adding to students' efforts without increasing the level of thinking. So you're adding more to the students' efforts without moving up that taxonomy. So, and then complexity is causing students to move across levels of thinking. So that's when you are climbing up that taxonomy. It's important, if you want to increase students' level of thinking, to know the differences between these two and when to implement them into lessons. And so, towards the end of our book, we have Chapter 8, Putting It All Together. And so this dealt a lot with putting everything that we've read in the book to use in your classrooms. So studying and learning all this information would be pointless if we didn't apply it to our teaching. So flipped classrooms is one way to integrate all of this together. So it's a student-centered kind of form of teaching which occurs by students watching teacher-made or commercial videos, digital media, etc. They engage in higher level thinking by having activities and discussions about the new information. So that moves up on that taxonomy like we just talked about. So there should be novelty in them, which we've also talked about, rehearsal, and meaning for students, which we've also talked about. So unit plans, that's another part of it, should also take all these into effect, plus outside information such as contextual factors. Units should have a clear learning goal in mind and plan out assessments and designs for instruction. They should give room for instructional decision making, and then at the end, the teacher should be able to analyze student learning and reflect and self-evaluate for the next unit. So, understanding how the brain works and how it learns, that will help educators be the best they can be for the students, which we all know we want to be. We want to be the best we can for our students. We want to give them the best chance to be successful in our classroom. So, let's put all of our knowledge into practice. Thanks for listening, guys.